Adrian, you mentioned about the property taxes.
Right.
Well, my property tax bill has got county, city, water management fund, and school board.
Right.
So you would be eliminating all four of those
Absolutely.
components?
It would be statutorily codified that 100% of your primary residence value is exempt from property taxes. And like I said, the way that we would offset those costs, because obviously counties, cities, they need funds to operate.
Right, that's why I'm...
That would be offset by the state reduces its portion of the sales tax. In Seminole County, sales tax is 7%? Is that
6.
It's 6.
Yeah, they average it.
Oh, good for you guys. So the county has no portion. That all goes to the state. What would happen in that case is that we would be reducing the state portion of the sales tax by at least 2, perhaps 2.5 cents. We've got to really run the numbers out to determine where it's going to be. And all that balance would go now to the counties to offset the loss of the property tax. But the difference is you would pay the same thing that you're paying now on everything that you buy, but you would be saving, on average, the average Florida family would save $150 a month. If you have a mortgage on your house and it's PITI, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, you would see your payment drop by $150 on your mortgage. So that is immediate stimulus the right way, by scaling back government, by keeping more money in the hands of the people who earn it.
Thank you.
Could you complete your intrastate policy?
The Florida Interstate Commerce Act, what that says is anything that is manufactured, grown, produced, fabricated in Florida, and distributed and sold in Florida will be completely immune from any federal regulation. This will apply to goods and services too. This basically would be a catch-all for one of the problems. As I travel the state, I talk to a lot of small business owners. I am a small business owner, so I know this firsthand. Dave, you know this firsthand. I would say for small businesses in Florida, probably the most common number of employees that I find out there is 49 employees. It's a very odd number until you know why. Once you get to 50 employees, you're in a completely different federal regulatory bracket. So what these employers do, and I've talked to people firsthand who have said, look, I could really use another 10 people, but there's no way that I'm going to hire those people, and I'm going to deal with all the federal regulations, and I'm going to have to hire another 2 people in HR to deal with all the paperwork, and my costs are going to go through the roof, and on and on and on. So because of those federal regulations that are ridiculous and redundant anyway, because we have state regulations in place that we have much greater control of. If we want regulations, which I'm not a big fan of, we can do it on a state level, and we can determine it there. But because of that, we're actually stifling the economy. We're costing jobs. Now, think of this for a minute. What if every business in Florida that operated exclusively in Florida was immune to any federal regulation? Boom. All those 49 employee companies are hiring. All those startups that said, it's not worth the regulatory hassle, are starting up. Next thing you know, companies are moving to Florida because they realize they can come to Florida and they can have a $20 million or 20 million person consumer base. It's going to be very attractive. And our neighboring states are going to get real tired of all the jobs going to Florida. We're going to have that big sucking sound that Ross Perot once talked about happening in Florida. The other states are going to say, well, we better do the same thing. Next thing you know, we fixed a major problem with our entire national economy, and we've done it through the concept of nullification, through the concept of the 10th Amendment, and through the Constitution. And we've restored power to the states and the people that has been usurped by the federal government under the Commerce Clause for decades and decades. So, and I think you've got some thoughts on Florida interstate commerce as well.
I don't know what I can add to what you just said, but the Commerce Clause is where the Congress has taken most of its power. That and health, safety, and welfare. And under the Commerce Clause, and in law school they say if it sneezes on the phone, you're in interstate commerce, and it's really true. So that is way overreaching. Now, also, it's going to be very hard to accomplish what Adrian wants to accomplish. They have found that farmers who grow their own food for their own consumption are violating our interstate commerce. Even though they don't sell it, it doesn't leave their yard, they eat it. Well, Congress says, well, that offsets the interstate market. So it's a tough one.
That was a 1934 decision?
Yeah. It's way overreaching. It's going to be hard to retract, but it doesn't make sense, and we need to bring it back.
Didn't the Supreme Court decide that too?
Yeah.
Supreme Court holds it up, yeah.
Yeah, and think about that for a minute. Our founders said that the federal government should be authorized to regulate commerce that happens between different states. And it kind of makes sense because Florida may have different laws than California, and let's say the two states are trading. So the federal government is there to regulate the commerce between. If there's a dispute under which laws apply, then the federal government applies. But it was never intended to apply to commerce within a state. And like in the 1934 decision, and the case escapes me now.
I believe it was California, and it had to do with hay.
Yes, exactly. And a farmer growing his own hay or his own crops or what have you for his own personal use on his own farm was, according to the federal government, interstate commerce. So it's one of those areas that the federal government has usurped power, has overreached, and it's the duty of the states to say, no, you're out of line, we're going to take back this authority.
Bill?
Yes, sir.
Question. From time to time, the EPA and the FDA come in. They're not exactly law enforcement like FBI, but they want to put people in jail for raw milk and other crap. How would the Attorney General's office keep them away?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. But before I answer that, I want to do two things.
Okay.
One, I want to thank Vicki Kirkland, because I forgot to do that before. And one of the things Vicki did for me is she did the research, so she knows she's been to the Libertarian Party for a long time. And she confirmed for me that I am the first Libertarian candidate for Attorney General in Florida. And then I later found from some national media that I'm the first third-party candidate for Attorney General in 97 years. So
Wow.
we're getting somewhere, and I think Vicki's going to lead it. In Florida, yeah. So I didn't answer this gentleman's question yet. And I said I had two things I want to ask. And one is, on the way over here, I saw a sign for raw milk. It said fresh raw milk on the road that we took here from Dave's place. Is that only for livestock?
You have to lie. Yeah, they have to write on the refrigerator only for animal
They make
consumption.
us lie all the time.
Yeah.
Kind of like fireworks are for scaring away birds from
Yeah.
fisheries.
Got trouble with that.
But to get to your question, I'm sorry, sir, but I just want to answer your question. I haven't answered it yet. The agencies don't really have that kind of police power. The police have usurped the police power that they have. And I'm concerned that the militarization of the police, which technology allows for it to happen, but is creating a divide between the people who are sworn to protect and the people that are protecting us. And I would like to see the police put protection of our civil liberties on equal ground with protection of our health, and not our health, but our safety. Keep our peace and protection of civil liberties. So that's, even the police have usurped that, but that is the role of the police to go out and do investigations. Now the DBPR had gone into barbershops with, I believe it was Orange County sheriffs, I think it was Orange County, with gun draws, almost like a SWAT team raid looking for drugs. This is way out of control. If I understand your question correctly, should the agencies be policing the industry to that level? I would say no.
Because usually they come in and they can get the local cops to help enforce them some illegal warrant.
At best, it should be a civil matter.
Right, and it should
Right,
be
not a
should be
criminal
civil.
matter.
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
and a warrant. And now the courts have upheld the agency warrantless searches. To find the agencies don't need the warrant. This is not good.
Okay, right here.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi. I'd like to know what both of your thoughts are and what you plan on doing if you get in office about CAFRAs, Comprehensive Annual Financial Reports.
With regard to the candidates report?
No, CAFRs.
CAFRAs, Comprehensive Annual Financial Reports, are totally illegal. They got billions of dollars in them. They're for the retirements of the judges and district attorneys and everybody else, and it's totally illegal. What do you plan on doing about any of that?
Researching it.
Same answer here. I'm not familiar with that. That's CAFRA.
Comprehensive annual financial reports.
Comprehensive
Every
Okay.
county, every city, even the state, there must be thousands of them throughout the country, and they equate to trillions of dollars in those funds. Trillions that could be going toward the taxpayer instead of retirements of the criminals.
Like pension for?
They're using it as a pension fund, yes.
And where do the funds originate? County level?
Every level, from the county up to the president, up to the White House.
Yeah,
Every level.
I'll take a look at
And
that.
all the fines that people pay to the courts for victimless crimes and everything go into these caverns. And it's completely illegal.
I'm making a note to myself right now.
Gentlemen, come forward. Okay, next question's right here.
Just a quick one. So, you mentioned that you want to move the commerce to a commodity-backed system, which does make a lot of sense. But how can a state, on its own, move its money supply over to a commodity-backed money supply?
Well, a lot of people don't know this, but by using Federal Reserve notes, we are actually in violation of Article 1, Section 10 of the United States Constitution. Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution in part says states shall use no thing but gold and silver coin as a tender in payment of debt. Now, last time I looked, the state of Florida does not pay their debts in gold and silver coin. Now, obviously, we're talking about a massive undertaking. We are talking about a state with a budget of $74 billion. By way of comparison, our state budget is larger than Russia, the nation with the world's largest nuclear arsenal. Our state budget is larger than their defense budget. So obviously converting that entire budget to gold and silver coin is a daunting task. But what I would like to do is start to get on the path to constitutional currency. I firmly believe that because of the policies of the U.S. Treasury and the Federal Reserve System, such as quantitative easing, ex nihilo currency out of nothing from fractional reserve lending, is putting our it's driving our currency to collapse, quite frankly, via inflation, which we've seen for the past 100 years, exacerbating further into potentially even hyperinflation, which is the prices of everything doubles every day. So what I'm looking to do is provide Floridians with a shelter from that potential economic storm. One of the ways we can do that would be to begin converting our reserve fund, some of our assets, into gold and silver coin. The second component of that is to introduce the Competing Currencies Act here in Florida. Other states have already done this. Basically, what that would say is gold and silver coin are a legal tender as bullion. Right now, U.S. American Eagles, U.S. American Buffaloes can be traded as face value for currency. But anyone would be a fool to do it because an ounce of gold, which is worth roughly $1,000, has a $50 face value. So it would be ridiculous to trade it at face value. What the Competing Currencies Act would say, basically, individuals would have the ability to trade in whatever commodity they want. If you want to trade in chickens, that's fine. I mean, it's all part of what we should allow currently. And it's a step to providing people with that hedge against the potential collapse of the U.S. dollar brought about by the Federal Reserve System. So.
Two quick questions, gentlemen. We were out campaigning today in South Papco, which is a heavily minority area. Two issues that were constant refrains that were coming back to us. One, and this is for both you gentlemen, one, red light cameras, and the opposition red light cameras. We were talking to people who had to choose between food and paying the ticket.
Right.
Now, Libertarians, as a general rule, I don't want to be too broad here, but we have had a difficult time appealing to the minority community. That is a tangible issue with these voters. I want to get your take on that. The second is restoration of voting rights for felons. So we're talking to people on the street who desperately would like to participate and have the civil rights restored. No one's talking to them. No one's interested in helping with the process. Also, again, another potential way, because of civil libertarians, that's another outreach. I want both your takes on that.
You want to start with that one?
I'll address the second one with regard to restoration of voting rights and civil rights for felons who lose their rights who do time. In my opinion, they should get it back immediately. It should be part of their discharge, part of their release. And what I know from limited experience on that is not only is it not automatic, but the person who lost their voting rights and their civil rights have to take an initiative to go out and get it. And there's a process. And it's, like most processes, it's not simplified.
Yeah.
And I think that should be part of the release. And there's something else we can do for the minority communities is back off of the nonviolent crimes. And I've heard Adrian say many times, no victim, no crime. Particularly with regard to marijuana. Half the folks in prison are there for victimless crimes, and I keep hearing different numbers, but we've heard something about 90% are minorities for marijuana offenses. So it's not being handled correctly. And one other thing on that, for the minorities, what I'd like them to take a good look at is when our state, participated with 49 other states to settle against Mellon Bank for misuse of the state employees' pension funds. It was a huge settlement, $28 million to Florida. When the state settled, it was just outright thievery. No one went to jail.
Right. Yeah. No one goes to jail.
They got bonuses.
Yeah, did you want to hit red light cameras as well?
No, I'm taking much time.
Well, I agree with Bill on full restoration of felons' rights upon release. When your debt to society is paid, it's paid. It should be a clean slate at that point. So I do support the restoration of rights. On red light cameras, absolutely, unquestionably unconstitutional. They're a clear violation of the Fifth Amendment. There is no due process whatsoever. In fact, a lot of communities have now, with these little review boards ministerial review boards that they've instituted, have gone even further to ensuring that you have no due process when you're charged with a red light camera offense. So I fully support a complete ban on the use of any automated traffic infraction devices in Florida. So, and part of that thing is I knew Mark would like that. Part of that also is how do we reach out to the minority? Surprisingly, it's easy. The same concepts that that libertarians have appeal across the spectrum. Recently, well, actually not too recently now, it was in September of last year, the last scientific poll to actually include my name. It's funny, after this poll, they stopped putting my name on any of the polls, which are run by the media and their corporate interests. But at that time, I polled at 9% in a three-way race with Rick Scott and Charlie Crist. Among minorities, I was polling even higher than that, in the area of 10% among African Americans, I forget exactly, but slightly higher among Hispanics, big among independents. So our message, I really believe, the message of freedom, the message of constitutional government is pretty universal. Our biggest problem is getting that message out to people without the hundreds of millions of dollars in campaign finances and without the automatic, fawning media following us around like they do the two major party candidates. So I think if we just stay on message, it doesn't matter what demographic people are in, people like liberty.
Actually, while we're on the subject of capital punishment, I have a question for both you gentlemen. I grew up in South Florida, and I was also worked with a lot of students at FAU. And they have decided, for whatever reason, to have their stadium sponsored by a private prison. So, backhanded slap to FAU, but I had a question for you gentlemen about private versus public prisons and what your takes are on them.
I support privatization of just about everything that government does. There's one exception. Well, there's a few exceptions, but one of them is prisons. There should never be a profit motive for taking away somebody's liberty. Enforcing law. Enforcing law and, quite frankly, doling out punishments for true criminal offenses. I'm not talking all the criminal offenses we have today, but when someone harms the life, liberty, or property of another, it is the solemn duty of government to enforce those laws and to administer punishment. And it should never be in the hands of any organization that it is their goal to increase the prison population, as opposed to a solemn duty that should only happen in the most egregious circumstances. Did you want to?
Yep.
Sure, I'd like to add a bit to that, Neil. Just posted on our website an issue statement about government versus private prisons. And I did that because it's a little tough, because we really believe in free market capitalism and government outsourcing. But so I try to make the balance there in that statement, but come out and say, as Adrian just said, there's some duties of government that are just non-delegable. And that's I think is a dangerous, slippery slope we're going down with private prisons.
Non-delegable. That's a good word. I got to remember that. Right here.
I have a couple questions. The first, many of the technologies, like, for example, the red light cameras, that are being used to infringe on our liberties. What kind of ideas do you have to change the methodology of these technologies to where their purpose is diverted from their civil right grabbing monopolies into something that will actually benefit people and our government in the long term?
Well, in the case of red light cameras, I don't want to convert them to anything. I want them gone. So those are one I wouldn't. But surveillance is an interesting a topic there, and I think that we've gone far too far in the surveillance society here in Florida. I know right here in Winter Park, that's a big issue that Dave is leading the charge on here. There's actually cameras all over, financed by the Department of Homeland Security, and as I touched on earlier, with Real ID, now your facial recognition scan is in a federal government database. They're installing security cameras. If you've seen the crossbars of traffic lights now have a camera pointing down at your windshield. Well, those are all integrated through fiber optics into something called the Intelligent Transportation System. And it's in process now that those will be integrated with the facial recognition system, so that everywhere that you drive, if you have a Gold Star driver's license, the government will be able to catalog you, track you, and identify you. So my default position is that we should completely reverse this trend. The Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution, Article 1, Section 12, clearly state that we have the right to be left alone. We have the implied right to privacy. We have the right to anonymity in public. Not necessarily privacy in public, but anonymity. We can walk down a street without anyone knowing who we are unless we choose to tell them, and we're losing that through technology. So my default position would be if I'm asked to sacrifice liberty to have a perfectly safe world, I'd much rather have a dangerous freedom.
Paraphrasing.
Well, I think Bill wanted to follow up.
I'll be quick. Aside from all those sound arguments that Adrian just shared with you, and the fact that the red light cameras is a money raiser, there's a common sense argument. Is that really the kind of culture we want to live in? And I don't think it is. I don't think it is. And another thing I advocate for, and it has to do with the same sort of technology, is although we don't want to be recognized, at least we want our privacy, and in public you don't have a right to privacy in public. You do have a right to anonymity. But the police should be filmed and recorded in public without interference to the person that's filming and recording.
In the course of their duties.
In the course of their duties, don't interfere with them, don't get in the way, but you have the right to observe them doing their public duties in public, and I think that'll make for a better police force.
Right, and also my second question, if I may. Now, one of the things I know, freedom of expression, I believe that's also something that's guaranteed in the Constitution.
Hey, Andre, we can't hear your question.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry. I'm always just a soft-spoken kind of person. I know freedom of expression is also supposedly one of our constitutionally guaranteed rights. And for me, I like to, one of my ways of expressing myself is with my photography. And so I like to go to the Sanford Airport, Orlando Airport, and take photos of the airplane. And
That'll get you in
under
trouble.
the guise of security,
Got him arrested, actually.
Wow.
yeah, and under the guise of security, those are the claims that they say why I shouldn't be able to take pictures of an airplane from a public parking lot, not in a restricted area where I'd have any interference with the actual operations of the airport, but from the public parking lots, just taking pictures of airplanes. And this is a global hobby. It's not just a one-off thing. I mean, aviation's my passion. I like to photograph it.
Right.
And my photos worldwide have nearly 750,000 hits. And I'm
Wow.
proud of that. Got
Well done.
special access. But the big thing is that every time I try to do, this is what I enjoy. This is one of the most important things, parts of my life, taking pictures of airplanes, is that I always have to fear being arrested
Yeah.
or having my liberties deprived of and having my status defamed because of that
Your
I
hobby.
enjoy doing.
Yeah.
Well, you're right to mention freedom of expression because the court decisions that find that citizens do have a right to film police in their public duties does connect it to freedom of expression and to other rights. It's nice you want to take pictures of airplanes, but at the airport, it's not the place to do it. The reason is the rationale behind that is historically invasions of our country would occur at entries to the border. The airport is considered an entry to the border. Now, as much as that makes sense, they've taken, and the Amador case is one that reflects on this, they've taken that rationale and extended the border protection from airports out 100 miles, which in Florida is coast to coast, as well as New Jersey and Rhode Island and a lot of other states along the coast. So, yes, the airport is a point of entry from foreign attack, but it's been extended way too far. So, careful there.
And under currently, if you were to take a picture in this room, as some people I've seen doing tonight, you could potentially worry about having to deal with the TSA or the Department of Homeland Security. Actually, what Bill was saying is absolutely 100% correct. There is a 100-mile buffer zone from every U.S. border and around every international airport. And as you know, Florida's a peninsula, and the coast is a U.S. border. So the entire state of Florida is essentially a Fourth Amendment exclusion zone when it comes to how the Border Patrol, how the TSA, how the Department of Homeland Security can operate. But my position is really taking photographs of airplanes. Is that a threat to national security? I don't think so. I think that you should absolutely be allowed to do that. And it's idiocy that we've gone so far into the opposite direction. We got so scared after 9/11 that we sit here, almost 13 years later, and now we look around and we barely recognize our country anymore because of the freedoms that we've lost. I mean, if you really spend a little time thinking about what the world was like in 2000s and the liberties that we've lost since then, it's astounding and it's accelerating. So my position is we must defend our rights. We must defend our inherent and alienable rights against this continuous assault under the veil of safety and security, or we're going to lose them all. And none of us is going to be safe or secure. And we're not going to be safe or secure from our own government.
Who won us or Bin Laden?
What's that?
Who won us or Bin Laden?
Exactly. If you want to fundamentally change America, that's exactly what they did. But they've done it at the hands of the Department of Homeland Security. Right here.
Yes, sir. I have two questions. One is legal in nature, the other economic. And I come from a standard dysfunctional family, meaning that Part of the family is a conservative Christian, and then there's my brother-in-law and his partner.
Blame the wife.
And we're all headed up to Washington in a couple of months so that they can get married. My question is, I'm certain that you considered civil union versus gay marriage, and I'm wondering whether or not you believe that you may alienate a certain amount of the conservative Christian base in the state by choosing gay marriage rather than civil union. Case in point, even my brothers-in-law, soon to be, do not expect to have the right to be called married, but what they do want is to have a civil union so that if one is in the hospital, the other can go in and make decisions for them.
That's a compromise on their part, and I understand why they're willing to compromise. But that's not going to be for long. With the Supreme Court decision we had in October 2013, one by one the states are going to retract from that. I really don't see that being with us much longer. The fact that same-sex marriage requires equal treatment from the state. Not from the church, not from the community, but from the state.
Okay.
Let me also hit that as well. I take a slightly different approach to marriage than Bill does. While I do agree with the 14th Amendment position, if we're going to have a law, it should be applied universally. However, I don't believe the government has any business in marriage whatsoever.
Right.
It actually infuriates me that 23 years ago, when I married my wife, I had to go to the government and get a license. And it's really infuriating when you actually identify what the legal definition, I think Black's Law defines a license as permission, government permission to do something that would otherwise be illegal. So by definition, marriage is illegal without the government's sanction. Now, I personally believe that people should be free to choose whomever they want to marry, and the government should have no say-so in it whatsoever. And if they want to go to an attorney and create a contract between the two individuals, if they want to go to a church that offers that type of service, they can go to that church. If a church doesn't want to marry same-sex couples, they absolutely have the right to say, no, we're not going to do it. But marriage, for millennia, was a private or religious ceremony. Government, in this country at least, did not get involved till not long after the Civil War, and it was to prevent interracial marriages. So, that's the problem that we have. Government shouldn't be involved in it in the first place. So I think we ought to go back to the default position that we had for a couple thousand years and work just fine.
If I can have an economic...
Before that, if you have a question, just keep it to one question, because there's a bunch of people that have.
Okay, just one more question. You said, sir, that you would like to cut about 30% from the state budget.
Right.
Steal my question.
And I'm wondering a couple of things. Over what period of time would you make this cut? And where would you cut? And in order to make up some of the deficit as well, as a third part of the question, would you consider reinstating the intangible tax?
No, absolutely not on the intangible tax. As far as the budget, roughly the numbers work out to about $21 billion. Now, I haven't gone through every line item of the budget. The budget, if you've never seen the state budget, it's 374 pages of line items. It's a lot of stuff. But yeah, we can cut 30% just by cutting the bureaucracy, the waste, the fraud, the inefficiency, the redundancy. It's really simple, folks. Like, give you an example. How many times have we heard politicians saying, we need more money for schools? All the time. More money for schools, more money for schools. And quite frankly, the classrooms are not getting enough money. When teachers have to go to Walmart and buy school supplies out of their own pocket, we've got a serious problem. Do you know how much we spend per student per year, K through 12 in Florida? $12,000 per student per year. If you take that to a classroom level, That's about $250,000 per classroom. Now, if that money were not being wasted through bureaucracy and doled out in crony deals to legislators' brothers-in-laws and just completely mismanaged with no accountability, we would have plenty of money to pay teachers a great salary. Money left over for band, for sports, for you name it, across the board. The problem is that so little of that money reaches a classroom. It's being, and quite frankly, in some cases, it's literally being stolen along the way, legally stolen through legislation. It's being wasted, mismanaged, filtered through bureaucracy. I want to get that all out of the system. We need to get schools back to local, and we need to do that with the entire budget. Do you know how much redundancy we have in there? The State Department of Environmental Protection, for example. There is so much corruption and redundancy in that department. We have so many different environmental departments. We have FWC. We have all these other ones that are essentially doing the same thing. And each of them has their own huge budget. If we just got that under control, if we just had someone that was willing to take a serious look and wasn't afraid of the consequences of saying, well, you're cutting the budget. You're damn right I'm cutting the budget. And that's exactly what I intend to do, and that's how we're going to do it. I don't care about getting reelected. If I can get what I want to get done in 4 years, our state's going to be better off, so much better off, that the people are going to want to go back to the old ways of doing things, and I can go home and get back to running my business and spending time with my family, which is all I want to do in the first place. I just want to get government to the point where it leaves us the hell alone.
Did you have a question?
Yeah. I wanted to find out what your Bill's feeling on is because of what they've been doing to the public. They've criminalized everything that we're doing. I'm facing 20 years in prison as a victim of a crime because the police, just like in the Zimmerman trial, they didn't follow the rules. And the problem being is we have these police departments that aren't following the rules. We got the FDLE that cleans up their messes because you never see a police officer get punished.
Is there a question in there?
Well, with that, how do you propose to help us now so that this gains momentum to move forward? In Mark's case, they totally illegally arrested him. They detained him, and there's no penalties to the judges, to the police officers, and the whole process, like also Belvin Perry did to ban him from handing out leaflets at Orange County Courthouse. You know, every single one of us in here are, I would say, activists. And a lot of people don't want to get active because of the fear that they're putting in it. What do you propose for now to get people from and get these people prosecuted? The judges, this is the most corrupt court in the state here in Seminole County. I'm a prime example of it, but I've talked to a bunch of people in here. What do you propose to move this forward?
Well, Seminole, oh boy, that's a tough one. Your county certainly has got its share of publicity. In Mark's case, the judges are voted. So the judge is subject to popular election. Judges often get voted back in, but the judge is constitutionally elected. So you can vote the judge out. It doesn't happen as often. As far as the police officers go, they have a great deal of immunity because they have operational discretion. I'm not sure to answer your question. Really not.
Well, let me jump in there, and I'm gonna convince Bill of this along the way. I really believe that it's time that we actually start criminally and civilly prosecuting government officials who violate the Constitution. I think there's ways to do it. I think we can do it under Title 42. I think we can do it under Title 18, U.S. Code if we have to. Or we could just do it as far as a state operation under violations of the Florida Constitution. But yeah, we've got to rein it in. I mean, the corruption, the abuse of power is getting so overwhelming that, yeah, it truly is. We have to take a stand against it.
Awesome. When you said, what are we going to do, see, John's still here, okay, I'm starting to work, I'm going to ask a question here. I'm starting to work with John Simborn here on the common law citizens grand juries, if you've ever heard of that.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, now, I don't really know, you just said we've got to do something, but I don't know what else to do.
Well, as far as the Attorney General and the Governor, we can actually prosecute. You know, a bill could seek to prosecute. For example, let's take a case where we have an officer that was just.
Well, how about Belvin Perry?
Yeah. Well, Belvin, that's a different set of circumstances slightly. While I believe Perry acted absolutely egregiously, he violated the Constitution. In your case specifically, there was a clear conflict of interest. He violated your civil rights, but there's mechanisms by which we have to go through that process, specifically when we're talking about U.S. constitutional rights. I believe that there's Title 42 and Title 18 actions. It's a Title 42 and Title 18 actionable item there. But let's take another example, like one that's more clear-cut. A law enforcement officer who uses excessive force, that just completely unwarranted, and we see more and more cases of that. I believe instead of going through an investigation to determine whether that officer should be fired, I believe that at some point it's so egregious that those officers need to be jailed. Right. That the treatment should be the same as if it was any citizen committing that kind of brutal act. So I really believe that we need to hold our government officials and our law enforcement agents and things of that nature to the same standards that a regular citizen would be held to. If it's an inappropriate use of force for a citizen, then it's probably an inappropriate use of force for a law enforcement officer.
But just would add to that, the problem there is that we have sovereign immunity. And if you're not sure where that comes from the king can do no wrong. So, yeah. Sovereign immunity.
Any other questions?
I have more questions.
Just quick, what's your stance on abortion?
Me personally, I'm personally pro-life, but I recognize it's one of those issues. It's the most difficult issue because it's the only situation in the human condition where the rights of two individuals are completely intertwined, cannot be separated. My position is the current law that abortion should be legal up to the point of viability. Up to that point, the point that the fetus is viable, it should be the woman's right to choose. Beyond that point, it's the duty of the government to protect the life of the child. So I'm really not a proponent of changing the existing standards. I wouldn't support any late-term abortions or anything like that, nor would I support any restrictions on early-term abortions whatsoever. So I'm kind of like a status quo on that. But the other two candidates in the race, similar positions, so really, as far as the three candidates in the governor's race, there's not much difference between our positions, quite frankly.
I have another.
Speak up.
Okay. I have another question.
Maybe stand up. I can hear it better.
All right. I have another question about, we all know about the whole situation with Obamacare. I originally, personally, based on my perception of what I thought it was, that I used to support it. But now knowing what I do know about it, that's pretty much made to just take from people in ways that shouldn't really be happening. I'm obviously very disappointed in that program. I'm trying to figure, my question is, it's sort of like the question about prisons in which healthcare should be considered an essential service that people shouldn't be depriving themselves of because of private corporations that just want a bunch of money. We all know the current Governor Scott, his corporations have defrauded people of a lot of money, and yet surprisingly he still got elected. Believe me, I didn't vote for him. I didn't vote for him. But do you support an idea of, like in the United Kingdom, for example, of having a means for the government to provide health care directly to those who would need it, rather than trying to profiteer off of it, like the corporations that run Halifax Medical Center or Orlando Regional Medical Center, all of those?
Yeah, yeah.
Do you want to start with that?
Well,
Because I might take it.
as Christian said, we do have Medicare. And remember when Obamacare was being debated, one argument was, why don't we just lower the age of Medicare? The system's already in place, it seems to be working. And it's working because it comes out of people's pay. When people pay into it, it goes back. So it's not being imposed on people who are not contributing. I lost my thought on that. But I'm sorry, I did lose my thought on that. But what I think I know is the Obamacare, I think, is really just a pretense for government takeover of a huge part of our economy. And we know that the student loans were part of the Affordable Care Act. So with the Affordable Care Act came the 2010 Reconciliation Act that put private lenders out of the student loan business, allegedly so that the profit from student loan interest would go to fund health care. So I think that a lot of the debate that's being had about health care is just a precursor to where it's really heading, and that's toward government-controlled industries.
Let me just jump in on the healthcare issue. First of all, no, I would absolutely never support single payer. I do not support Obamacare. As governor, I would do everything possible to nullify it in Florida. But we have to look at the root cause. One of the things that I do is, when I see a problem somewhere, I try to look at the root cause. And in the healthcare field specifically, government involvement is the root cause of the problems that we have today. You're way too young to remember, but prior to 1965, prior to Johnson's Great Society, when government started getting involved in healthcare, we had the best healthcare system in the world. It was completely affordable. The average family could easily afford to go to the doctor. The doctors would come to them. If they had a medical emergency or prolonged illness, they could afford to go to the hospital. They might have to make some payments, but people weren't going bankrupt over it. And the reason that is because government wasn't involved, the free market sorted everything out. Here. And the next step in the process is they created Obamacare knowing that it could not work. It's absolutely impossible for it to work. It is the biggest Ponzi scheme of all time because they require young, healthy people. Now they're even saying it. Well, we need more young, healthy people to sign up to pay for the people who are sick. I can't believe they're admitting that. That is the definition of a Ponzi scheme. But this is just a step towards single payer, towards a complete takeover, to another huge chunk of our economy. And that is really the goal. My solution, go the other direction, go back to free market and charity, and that's where we'll truly have affordable health care for everyone.
I wanted to go back to when you were talking about the budget and not enough money in schools, but there really is enough money. Where's the communication breakdown? I know a lot of teachers who buy their own supplies and they're told, that that's the government's fault, that there's not enough money. And then further, are you for privatizing education, and do you think that's realistic, and if so, what kind of timeline?
I support any move for additional privatization in schools. Am I going to sell off the public schools? No, absolutely not. But I do support, promoting that, fostering. I like homeschooling as well. But as far as the budget goes, when you say they call up, the school board and the hires up, and those guys say there's no money, have you noticed normally they're sitting in a multi-story marble building that costs, $150 million to build? That's the problem. We've got 2 middle managers for every teacher. Their bureaucracy, when you look at it through the budget line items, it's just absolutely insane. We've got too much federal government involvement. What the federal government does is it takes our money via the form of taxes, sends it up to Washington, D.C., trickles around through a bunch of lobbyists and through Congress there, comes down to Tallahassee, it gets washed around there as well, and then it ends up in the classroom, where a nickel out of every dollar that we sent to the Department of Education ends up back in the classroom. I want to break all those cycles in between. You know, there's no reason each county has a school board that is 100% capable of administering the schools in their county. They don't need the federal involvement, and they need very minimal state involvement. That's what I want to do. And when we get to that point where we keep the money local, where we keep the control local, you'll have a lot more say in your children's education. If you don't like something going on in your school right now, you call up your principal and say, hey, I don't like this curriculum. Well, as of now, since the implementation of Common Core in late 2012, they're going to say, sorry, that's federal standards. There's nothing I can do about it. If we get control and money back to the local level, you call up your school board member, they're going to listen to you. And that's the difference. And we're not going to need to be spending $12,000 per student per year when we're keeping the money local. That's what I intend to do.
Doesn't the lottery fund go to education?
Not anymore.
That's what it's supposed to.
No, the lottery fund is now just a giant slush fund that most of it is going into the general fund.
The cameraman would like to ask another question.
Yes, the cameraman, as a product of the FCAT and as a college student now, how do you guys feel about the FCAT standardized testing in general and the requirement that to go to a state-funded institution you have to take the SATs and or ACT tests?
I don't necessarily have a problem with standardized testing in general, but what's happened with the FCAT is, and I know this firsthand, I have a 20-year-old who just graduated high school, have a 15-year-old freshman in high school. What happens is that teachers are teaching to a test. Mm-hmm. They're teaching rote memorization of what's on the FCAT. Everybody goes into panic mode when it's FCAT time. Teachers no longer have the flexibility to actually teach critical thinking, to teach creativity. They're just teaching rote memorization of things that are going to be on the test. So it's the purposes, well, the purposes were never noble, but even where standardized testing may have some benefits, the implementation of it through the FCAT has been a miserable failure.
Hey, Adrian. So, you know, this is a Libertarian Party, and we talk a lot about certain kinds of freedoms, and some freedoms that have been around for a little more than millennia seem to be quite gone in the state of Florida. If you look around at all this food here, I'll bet you even that it's from an average of more than 1,000 miles away.
Right.
But if you tried to grow your food in your own yard, you know what'll happen to you.
Right.
Meanwhile, if the food shipments ever stopped coming here, if a hurricane wiped them out, if climate problems happened, if there was a blight at one of these corporate farms, we would starve to death and be eating each other in no time flat. So where do you stand on the right to grow? Not about even
I think we're a long way from cannibalism, but I agree with you 100%.
You give it a month, brother. It won't be a long way from cannibalism.
You see what happened on that cruise ship? They didn't have power for 2 days, and they were
already taking straws.
They were damn near.
You know, I actually, and quick, I'll answer your question, but quick side note, I actually saw a study. There was a survey done, and it was, they asked people, if the electricity went out, how long would you survive? And me, I'm thinking, well, that would be inconvenient, but I'd probably survive till about 80 years old. A quarter of the people said they would be dead within a week if the electricity went out. I've been trying to wrap my brain around that for at least a couple months, but to answer your questions, growing food is a critical component of property rights. The government does not have the authority to tell you what you can or cannot do on your own property. Now, yes, city municipalities have a little bit of right to say, well, you know, yeah, you can't build a 40-story building, here or whatever. But as far as growing a garden for personal use, that to me is a fundamental right. I was very disgusted with SB 501 that passed in 2010, I believe it was, that actually effectively federally outlawed the growing of food on your own property. Basically what that law said is If you grow food on your own property, and even if you just gave it to your neighbors, I mean, how many people have citrus trees in the yard? And what do you do every time of year, around February? You're giving it away to everybody you can. Well, actually, under federal law, that's illegal. That you would have to go to the USDA, get that inspected, fill out the forms, pay the fee. You'd have to go through I think there's even an FDA component of that. That's idiocy. Now, one of the good things of my plan is, like I said, I try to think of the root cause. How do we solve all of these problems with one root cause? Florida Interstate Commerce Act. If you're growing food on your own property and you want to sell that food to your neighbors via farmer's market, you want to keep it for yourself, you want to give it away to your neighbors, it would apply under the Florida Interstate Commerce Act. The federal government would have no authority to regulate it whatsoever, and that's what we should do. Now, when cities and municipalities do it, I would even like to see a state constitutional amendment or a state statute that says, yes, you absolutely have the right to grow food, front yard, backyards, anything like that. You would think so.
A natural right of man.
I believe it
to
is.
grow food wherever he damn well pleases, especially on
Not
his own property.
not wherever he pleases, but on his own property. Yeah, I believe that. Yeah, and I think we need to codify that.
Are you Mr. Law? All right. So you're
You're
challenged by that. Yeah. 100 years ago, you would have never asked that question.
No kidding. Well, United Kingdom does have free healthcare, which you use that as an example, and they do have their own military. If we didn't have such a presence around the world, especially in that region, they wouldn't have the daggone money for free healthcare. Because at one time they used to have one of the world's greatest militaries. If they were paying for that today, they would not be having free healthcare. We're going in debt while some of these other countries are profiting for it, And the other thing he was talking about earlier too, I think Benjamin Franklin said it perfectly well. Those who put safety before liberty deserve neither and will lose both.
Yeah.
Back then, that probably wasn't a threat, but they knew that this day would come.
I'm not sure if this law's changed recently, but as far as the growing, there was a lot of cities that mandate you have to have 80% grass in your property, which also effectively does the same thing. I think City of Orlando is trying to take out a garden.
They'll
How would
permit
you?
you to have 60% is the ordinance that they're now proposing in the city of Orlando, as if they have a right to permit you to grow what you want.
I think that ought to be codified on the state level, that they just don't have the authority to tell you can't have a garden.
Yeah. This may be out of your realm, but what about like HOAs regulating things like that?
HOA is a voluntary contract. So if you choose to move into a gated community with I'll tell you my personal position on it. I moved into a neighborhood with an HOA, and I read the rules, and they were just ridiculous. I mean, chickens was on there. You can't hang laundry in your backyard between 1 and 7 on Sunday. I mean, just things like that. So I got with a bunch of my neighbors that also thought it was ridiculous, and within 6 months of me moving in there, we disbanded the HOA. And it's funny, you think this is a very libertarian situation.
They're required by law, aren't they? The pub law?
Not in this case. Yeah, it was just an organization. But just a quick funny story. The neighborhood that I live in has a big brick sign in front, like most neighborhoods do. And a couple of years ago, somebody ran off the road and hit that sign. The woman was okay, but the sign was completely demolished. And so everyone was like, we don't have an HOA. What are we going to do? And one of my neighbors, and it's a pretty tight community, one of my neighbors goes, well, I'm a contractor. I'll put in the labor. And someone else says, well, I got a deal down where we can get the materials. Within a week, that sign was rebuilt, and it was better than ever. And it was just the neighborhood getting together and doing it without any specific. Yeah, there was no governing authority. We just all got together, came up with a plan, and implemented it. So, but yeah, the point is HOAs are voluntary. State has no business there. If you want to move into an HOA and you want to abide by those rules, then that's your choice. It's a contract.
One last question.
One last question.
And I have another announcement before.
Are you only going to ask one?
No, I don't have it, but let's take
one more question. Anybody have one?
Yeah, Phil, are you familiar with
the grand jury movement, the People's Grand Jury movement, and also with the Fully Informed Jury Association?
Well, what I was just talking to
He
Mark.
was talking about, but you need to get that incorporated in your campaign, because they're both very good movements. I got some information there with their websites. Because one's going to actually be a watchdog over local police and stuff. It's reinstating the grand jury from the old days.
Right.
And then the Fully Informed Jury Association, you've heard of them too, right?
Right.
And I'd like to see you incorporate both of them in your campaign, because there's a lot of people involved.
Right, and those are supported by the Libertarian Party of Florida as well.
Absolutely.
I've got it.
We need your support for these guys. We need funds.